get started here. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you. You show amazing endurance. I've lost count of how many panels, and you're still here. So you are to be congratulated. This is Olympic in its accomplishment. We've got an extraordinary panel here, and let me just quickly introduce them and tell you what we're going to do. We're going to begin with the former Prime Minister of Latvia, Mr. Dombrovskis, and he's going to make a few minutes of opening remarks. And then we're going to hear from the three other people on the panel. One is Robert Gates, who you just heard from, the former Secretary of Defense in my country, the United States. Sitting next to me here, we have Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, who, as you know, is the Vice Prime Minister of the host country here in Ukraine. And she oversees the portfolio for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And last but hardly least, we have the former Prime Minister, until recently the Prime Minister, and still the leader of the People's Front, Mr. Yatsenyuk. So it's an extraordinary cast of experience and talent. By the way, I'm still Richard Haass. My name hasn't changed in the course of all these panels, though my energy level has. So, Mr. Prime Minister, why don't we begin with you, make a few remarks. The subject for this is Ukraine, a test case for the West. And this is obviously a chance to pull together some of the themes we've dealt with today about Ukraine and some of the challenges it faces both internally as well as externally. So, sir, the podium is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of Yalta European Strategy for this invitation and for excellent organization of the event. Well, actually, I will be talking not so much in my capacity as former Prime Minister of Latvia, but rather in my current capacity as Vice President of European Commission. It is important to Ukraine's partners to debate how they can, and as the title of this panel reads, pass this test for the West. But what is even more important is for all of us to show commitment to the country itself. Ukraine has fallen victim to brutal military aggression. The territorial integrity of the state has been violated by force. And we cannot and we should not accept this in 21st century Europe. Despite the difficult geopolitical and security situation, the country is undertaking major democratic and economic transformation. In recent years, Ukraine has implemented more reforms than any European country. This is truly remarkable. But it still faces further tests. Few of us doubt that Ukraine is also a serious test for the Western powers' unity. It is a test for their diplomatic model or soft power, and most of all, of their staying power. It was always meant as a test by those who seek to exploit the West's perceived weakness. But contrary to their expectations, Europe showed strengths. Politically, the condemnation of Russia's action and support for Ukraine's territorial integrity were strong and persistent. Backing for economic sanctions was firm. This week, EU actually took a decision to prolong economic sanctions against Russia, and we have made it clear that full implementation of Minsk agreements is a precondition for them to be lifted. Solidarity with Ukraine's transformation effort continues. The EU-Ukraine Association Agreement is the most comprehensive the EU has ever offered to the third country. EU macrofinancial assistance to Ukraine is the biggest program the EU has ever given to a non-member state. The provisional application of a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement since the beginning of this year provides a good opportunity for Ukraine to move ahead with its economic integration with the EU. The first 7 months of 2016 have shown an increase in Ukrainian exports to the EU by 4.6% compared to the same period in a previous year. The EU remains Ukraine's largest trading partner, accounting for more than a third of the trade. The immediate challenges of security and stability can only be met if economic conditions and economic foundations are sound. Since the outbreak of the crisis in early 2014, the EU and its member states have pledged nearly 13 billion euros of support to Ukraine for a period up to 2020. More than 7 billion has been committed already. For example, the European Commission supports Ukraine through its macro-financial assistance instrument for a total of 3.41 billion euros through 3 consecutive programs of low interest rates conditional to reforms. These reforms are important in themselves, not just for the satisfaction of creditors. If the government stays on course of reforms, we could disburse the next tranche of 600 million euros by the end of this year. The EU will deliver further support in numerous other areas as well. The Anti-Corruption Support Initiative through our Public Administration Reform Program, with the Rule of Law Assistance Program, and through Justice Sector Reforms Project. We assist strengthening of local governments as well as capacity building of SMEs. And we provide humanitarian assistance for people affected by conflict in eastern Ukraine. It is also important to acknowledge what has been achieved already, despite the complex geopolitical, economic, and military circumstances. Constitutional amendments and reform in the justice sector, reforms in civil service and public procurement, reforms in the governance of state-owned enterprises and in the energy sector. The results are there. The Ukrainian authorities have managed to regain macroeconomic stability, also thanks to the prudent fiscal policy, which was instrumental for the macroeconomic stabilization. We expect the economy to return to growth of some 1–2% this year and further pick up speed next year to 3%. Inflation is clearly going down. Budget deficit targets are being met. International reserves have increased. But there is still a lot to do. Indeed, the biggest test lies within Ukraine. In the end, the effectiveness of our economic support is conditional to Ukraine's own efforts. Success can only come from continued and credible reforms within Ukraine. So we cannot do that for you. I would urge the Ukrainian government to act further, in particular against corruption. Concrete actions against corruption and the strengthening of anti-corruption institutions are necessary to build a modern state and economy. It is also crucial to regain the trust of the Ukrainian people in their own country and to cement the country's position within the international community. Internally and internationally, people want to be reassured that Ukraine's leadership has the determination to keep up its reform efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, the question for Europe is, as I said before, one of staying power. Can we continue to stay united and firm for Ukraine in the light of other economic, political, and security challenges we face? Ukraine should not become a forgotten conflict. The West cannot afford this to happen. We must stand up not only for Ukraine, but for the broader values of sovereignty and democracy, and for the logic of peaceful diplomacy. Thank you.
Apologize to Mr. Dombrovskis because I should have introduced him not simply in his former capacity as Prime Minister, but obviously in his current capacity as Vice President of the European Commission. Let me say that as I listen to this and to, in some ways, the conversations all day, I get the sense that literally and figuratively, Ukraine is fighting something of a two-front war. There's an external one, which is the traditional one, and we'll talk about that in a minute, or the traditional war in the sense of dealing with Crimea and with the East. But then there's the challenge domestically, the political, economic challenge. And we've got one current official of the government here, and obviously the former Prime Minister and one of the most significant political leaders. So I guess I'd like to begin with the question for each of them. We'll begin with you, Madam Vice Prime Minister, which is, why is it that Ukraine is having this difficulty? What's it about Ukraine that we have the problem with corruption, with what seems to be certain challenges to political stability? And why should the people sitting here and the people watching this, should we be optimistic? Are you seeing the seed sown where you can feel confident that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, Ukraine will have made significant progress?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm thrilled to be on this panel and privileged to be here, so thank you for this invitation. First of all, let's look at deeds and not words. And I think Vice President Dombrovskis just outlined quite a serious agenda that is happening already over these 2 years, 2.5 years after the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. So, yes, quite a few people would like to see us moving much faster. But that doesn't mean that we are not moving, or we are not moving in the right direction. Just a few numbers that we can name today. It's Ukraine, over just this year, moved up 4 points from 87th to 83rd place in World Bank doing business rating. And before that, 2 years ago, we were there on the 112th. So that means that we are moving in the right direction. And if I start naming all the reforms that we are dealing with right now, I think it will take much longer, and nobody will be ready to listen, because then they will have to miss the dinner. So I'd rather say why I think it's what Ukraine brings to the EU. And I think that what you really fight for is what you believe in. And what you believe in is what you really are. And we here believe in and fight for our freedom and our success at the same time, as you were pointing out. And while fighting for the freedom and success, we see freedom as a road to our success. And from that perspective, we see the European project as a project we see differently from Eurosceptics. We see it not as a political project, not as a purely economic project, or not as something that is different to traditional values. We see it as a project that has brought Europe peace and prosperity. And that's why we are, I think, absolutely destined to fulfill our aim and to reach that project. And once you have people that are interested in, and that are brought by, that are devoted and driven by some specific idea, by some specific goal, then this goal becomes irreversible. And I therefore think that Ukraine absolutely is destined to remain European country. It has always been. It is European country, and it will be a European country. But that does not mean that everybody in the West is ready to accept that. And I hope that I will have the possibility to dwell on these things as well.
Thank you. Mr. Yatsenyuk, in order for Ukraine to fulfill its ambitions with the European project, as the Vice Prime Minister put it, it would obviously mean two things, or three things. One would mean Ukraine would have to continue to evolve and reform. Secondly, the EU would have to feel comfortable with where it had arrived. And thirdly, the Russians, to some extent, would have to tolerate it. Or do I have that wrong? Do we have those three criteria, or is that an incorrect way of summarizing the situation?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. If I may, I'll switch to Ukrainian. Look, подивіться. У нас назва...
The name of this panel is Ukraine, test case for the West. I think that Ukraine has passed its test already through the revolution, fighting for our freedom, unbelievably difficult reforms that are very unpopular in the society and very difficult to communicate to the people. But there's no other way, and through self-determination. We have clearly stated that we are going to the European Union. So let me now switch from Ukraine to the European Union. It's not Ukraine being a test for the West. What is the test for the West? And there are some basic principles. Number one, democracy. And we have proved in Ukraine that we're a democratic state with a set of elections, transparent, honest, fair, change of power, freedom of speech, and real democracy that we have in this country. The second principle is the principle of freedom. We are fighting for our freedom, and that includes our fight against the Russian aggression. The third principle is the rule of law. And we have to do a lot in Ukraine, and the constitutional changes are very important. That give us a comprehensive reform of the judicial system. This is a very serious step. But there's the fourth principle in the world, the principle of security. And this principle is very important. Number one for the European Union, for Ukraine, and for the West as a whole. So now we have this question, whether the West is ready to put itself to this test for compliance with their own values. Chancellor Merkel comes to my mind because I think that she's one of the most powerful global leaders, and she never betrayed the principles of United Europe, and she told to all the world, "Wir schaffen das." We will overcome. We shall overcome, and we are the free world. Yes, these people are fleeing from war. We have to help them. And she wasn't really concerned with her own political regime because she believes in some values. And for the European Union, now it's really very, very important to demonstrate solidarity, unity, and the political will very clearly. In the State of the Union, address of the President of the European Commission, there are clear-cut, the first time in these years, the clear-cut priorities for the EU. We have to fight every day for the opinion of every Ukrainian that Europe is the right destination, that Europe stays united, that Europe stands up for their values. If Ukraine is not legally part of the EU, it's actually part of the European family. And Europe, if they manage, all the West, all the free world managed to pass this test without any agreements on Ukraine, without Ukraine.
Look, я з вами хочу не погодити.
I would like to disagree with you. I am not concerned with Russia and their tolerance or non-tolerance. Russia is a state that violated all the principles of the international law. Russia is a state that demolished all the foundations of the world after the Second World War. So, can we possibly tolerate?
Це незаконно обраний орган.
This is already an illegitimate body, because the Russian Federation have an election in the Ukrainian territory. We are not electing a Ukrainian parliament or president in Rostov or Moscow. So the principal task for West is to decide whether they are ready for this test and whether they will pass it. My position is as follows. If we preach any kind of appeasement policy,
Ми вже це мали. І це призвело до
we've had this before, but that led to the Second World War. We've seen it before. With the states like Russia, we have to talk in a very plain language. Strict diplomacy and powerful defense sector. We have to talk to them in one voice. All the capitals of the EU should speak in one voice. With Washington also, the voice of all the NATO countries. And the Russian Federation is a threat to NATO, not just for us, but also for all the free world. So, dear friends, we have no other way, I'm afraid. We're a country that represents the free world because we have proved that we are a free nation. And we are convinced that all the free world will pass the test.
but not value, denominated in Russian rubles. Що ми будемо
So we will preach the real foundation of this world. The foundation is liberties, rights, and human dignity. And the Ukrainian people have proved that by their deeds.
Just to be clear, I was not advocating that Russian tolerance is a necessary position. I was just putting it forward to draw you out, and I clearly succeeded at that. Part of my job here. Let me turn to Secretary Gates for a minute. And I'm going to give you two questions, Bob, and choose the one you prefer. One is looking backwards, which is whether you believe that there was any mishandling of the Ukraine situation by the United States and Europe that in some ways contributed to where we are, or looking forward, to what extent do you believe the current policy could or should be amended, and if so, how?
First of all, I think it's important to begin with at least my view of Putin's strategy. I think he has two strategic objectives. The first is the restoration of Russia's place as a great power and a power that must be reckoned with in dealing with any international problem, whether it has to do with countries on the periphery of Russia or as distant as Syria or a host of other problems. He is determined to reassert Russia's historic great power role. The second part of his strategy, in my view, is as old as the Russian Empire, and that is to create a buffer of pro-Russian states or frozen conflicts on the periphery of Russia to ensure that those countries are friendly to Russia or at least no potential political or military threat. I think that the challenge that American politicians have faced, and Europeans as well, is figuring out how to blunt Putin's aggressive maneuvers at the same time that we recognize Russia's place at the table in dealing with a number of international problems. That is a test that I think we have not passed. We have acceded to the first part of the strategy of Russia as a great power, not necessarily because we wanted to, but as in the case of Syria, because we were presented with a fait accompli. But in the second, I think that we have been very slow to react. After the seizure of Crimea and the conflict in eastern Ukraine, I think that NATO, in effect, woke up and has taken a number of measures, and the United States has as well, to bolster the defenses of NATO members on the periphery of Russia, the Baltic states in particular, as well as Poland. We've sent additional troops, we've spent money, we've sent equipment, we've pre-positioned equipment, we've intensified the air patrols over the Baltic, all to send a message to Russia that we will abide by our Article 5 commitments to members of NATO, specifically Poland and the Baltic states. Where I think we have not been, well, first of all, I think we were tardy in coming to that, but we have gotten to a better place. Where we have, I think, not been as strong and where our policy has fallen short is both in persuading our own political leaders that a integral Ukraine, prosperous, democratic, and free, is essential to the stability and security of Europe itself, and even to the larger relationship between Russia and the rest of the West. And we have, I think there are a number of things we could have done that we did not do in terms of material assistance, particularly in terms of perhaps defensive weapons, in terms of military training, and other such matters. I think there has been, particularly in the part of the EU, some important, as was mentioned earlier, some important contributions economically to Ukraine. But we have not made a point of the critical importance of Ukraine, as I described it, in this broader relationship. And I would have to tell you that as I look at our presidential campaign, I'm very concerned that neither candidate has addressed this issue at all. And to the degree it has been addressed, I find Mr. Trump's very positive statements about Putin and Putinism to be particularly worrying. So the bottom line, Richard, in response to your question is that I think first we have not emphasized, we being the US and Western Europe, have not emphasized the importance of Ukraine in this overall relationship with Russia. And I think we have fallen short in terms of manifesting that support. And my big worry is that the next president may do even less. So I think that's a situation we have to watch very carefully. But this is an area where I think we just have not, we finally tardily stepped up to our Article 5 responsibilities with our NATO members, but we have not addressed the importance of Ukraine.
Okay, I will show one characteristic, self-restraint. Because I know there's a lot of, I see already a lot of hands. So let me open this up for questions. And if the questions are short and the answers are short, we'll hopefully get as many as we can. Sir.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Vasyl Klympush-Tsintsadze. I represent International Center of Policy Studies, Ukraine. And I have a question to Mr. Dombrovskis, but not in your capacity as Vice President of the European Commission, but in your capacity as former Prime Minister of Latvia. Based on your Latvian experience, what should be your recommendation to the Ukrainian government in terms of implementation of Ukraine-EU association agreement? Why I'm asking this? There are certain illusions in this country that the road towards the EU is full with roses, and you as Latvian know better than many that it's not. It's a set of very painful decisions which sometimes cost very much, cost politically, economically. All the studies about EU enlargement prove that EU enlargement plane successfully took off and achieved the destination because of two engines. One is membership perspective, another is pre-accession instruments. Ukraine EU agreement has neither one engine membership perspective, and another engine assistance is much weaker. So where should we speed up and where should we be cautious, straight for periods of transition and so on, based on your Latvian experience? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. As regards EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, as I said in my introductory remarks, indeed, this is a most ambitious, most comprehensive association agreement we have ever signed with any third country. So from that point of view, what is worth concentrating right now, since it's already in provisional application, on practical implementation of this agreement and practical cooperation in a number of policy areas within this association agreement. And there it's really for Ukraine also to decide which are the priority areas in the association agreement you want really to advance further. And from our side, we are looking also at the ways how we can also deepen the economic ties with Ukraine, trade ties, how we can continue to provide assistance, how we can continue to provide technical assistance, so that we see this ever closer engagement between EU and Ukraine. So I would say at this stage it's maybe not so much about grand visions or so, but really about practical implementation of what has already been reached.
Gentleman in the second row.
Yeah, hello, Bozidar Jelic from Lazard, but I used to be the Deputy Prime Minister for EU integration of Serbia for 5 years. So a simple question for you, Deputy Head of the President of the Commission. We did many of the similar things as Ukraine did, but the one thing that every single Serbian citizen to this day remembers is visa liberalization. So clear question, when is it going to happen for Ukraine?
Well, as regards visa liberalization, European Commission has made an assessment of whether Ukraine had met the necessary conditions for visa liberalization. Conclusion was that yes, this is the case. So European Commission has made a proposal, formal proposal for co-legislators to proceed with visa liberalization, to establish visa-free regime. And now this proposal is with EU co-legislators, with EU Council, meaning with EU member states, and with European Parliament. And from European Commission side, we continue to stress the necessity to adopt this agreement as soon as possible. Well, we cannot, as an executive branch, if you want, give any deadlines to legislators, but we hope that it's doable still within this year.
Gentleman in the fourth row. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name is Andrius Kubilius. I was Prime Minister of Lithuania together at the same time when Valdis Dombrovskis was Prime Minister. I would like to continue the first question, which was asked about the future and about the test to European Union, longer-term future of Ukraine and test to European Union. Really, it was a very good point that we were successful in the Baltics. We implemented European reforms because we had association agreement, but at the same time we had quite clear perspective of membership in EU. For Ukraine has association agreement, but the perspective is not very clear. So then my question is very simple. Don't you think, I'm asking Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, don't you think that there is a need of some kind of new instrument on EU side, how to assist Ukraine while Europe is not able to give clear promise of membership? I have in mind something like really giving promise, conditional promise of big amount of money in a new perspective, which will start in 2020, 7 years annual perspective, with very strong supervision of reforms which Ukraine should need to implement, European-type reforms, in order to have access to those money. Once I said that, immediately after Maidan, I said that Lithuania is ready to give 3% of our structural funds, which would mean we shall stay without 10 billion, with 9,700 million in our annual perspective. But if each country in Europe would be in such a solidarity, that would bring, in the next perspective, for Ukraine something like 30 billion euros. Conditional money with very strong supervision, that money would be given to Ukraine if reforms would be implemented. So maybe we need to look into really much more effective instruments, not to allow Ukraine to stay with not clear promises, because without such a promise, because without new instruments, really motivation for reforms can be disappearing in Ukraine.
What do you think? Up to you, sir.
Of course, we can look what possible new instruments, what further support we can provide for Ukraine, and this is certainly something what we are willing to do. But we also cannot live with this assumption that reforms are needed or reforms are possible only if there is financial aid for that. Because, as I said also in the introductory remarks, reforms are there not to satisfy the European Union or IMF or whomever. Reforms are there first and foremost to transform the Ukrainian economy. And indeed, there's no denial, this perspective of EU membership was a very powerful driver in the case of Baltic states, also Poland. But I sometimes make this comparison. If you look back, like in 1990, at two countries, at Poland and Ukraine, GDP per capita was maybe some 20% higher in Poland than it was in Ukraine. Now it's several times higher. Politically, we're discussing that EU perspective for Ukraine is not a question of nearest future. Paul, former Prime Minister of Poland, is President of EU Council. So both economically and politically you see a huge difference. But this difference actually started very early on when Poland decided to go for ambitious structural reform agenda, something which was called shock therapy at that time, and when Ukraine started to hesitate about those reforms. And now, some 25 years or so down the road, we see to what a major difference it has led. So once again, reforms are not there to make EU or IMF or whomever happy. Reforms are first and foremost needed for Ukraine.
Before I call on anyone else, I want to get some questions for the other three people on the panel, as much as we appreciate hearing from Mr. Dombrovskis. So if you've got a question for someone else on the panel, sir.
Thank you very much. Volodymyr Ariev, a member of Ukrainian Parliament. I have a question to Mr. Gates. I will start with the two inconvenient word last time, Budapest Memorandum. And in this case, regarding to this Budapest Memorandum, which was, I don't know, was it failed or not, up to your opinion. And regarding the topic of the discussion, Ukraine and the test for the West, how do you think this test was fulfilled for the West? And if it was failed, how to create the trust of the international security in the future if Ukraine didn't got enough guarantees for its own security, and we have when we had an aggression against our state, we didn't got aid and assistance which was promised in 1994. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think you have a valid point, and I think that there are a number of aspects of the agreements that were reached at the end of the Cold War that have not turned out the way those who signed those agreements intended. But I would have to say that I was out of government when the Budapest Agreement was signed, but my recollection is that, as you suggest, the deal, if you will, was that if Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, and it had a lot, that its security would be protected. And it's hard, in light of where we are today, to say that the West upheld its end of the bargain.
That's pretty clear. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to stress that a little further. You say the West, but the Budapest Memorandum was being signed by Russia, plus United States and Great Britain. How can we explain that it is now the Normandy formula that is negotiating, which means France and Germany, and the Brits and the United States didn't even try to get their foot into those negotiations?
I spent nearly 30 years testifying in front of the American Congress, and I always found that the most effective answers were the most direct. And that is, I have no explanation for that. I don't know what happened.
I'd like to make a brief comment and a question for the two Ukrainian colleagues. There's been a bit of debate back and forth here about, is an association agreement, the trade agreement, kind of useless because it doesn't have a membership perspective. Let me recall that each of the similar agreements with states in Central and Eastern Europe, going back to the mid-90s, began to produce transformative change that was visible and measurable, to do with GDP improvements, health quality improvements, and other social elements that you can measure that showed clear improvement. For sure, it's less than the full package, but not negligible, and that is the road that Ukraine has started, and I think it's an important one. My question, because we've been talking a bit about the shadow of Russia in this context. Ukraine, of course, is sovereign, and as the former Prime Minister remarked, doesn't need its neighbours' permission as a sovereign state to choose its direction. But it seems to me, and it's to ask you, would you not accept that the most subversive response of Ukraine to Russian aggression is progress and transformation of Ukraine itself? So close to Moscow, so close to Russia, with all of those historic and cultural links, but transformed and modernized. And that, to me, is the nightmare of Russia. It would not be won on the military field. It will be won in the field of economic and social progress and development, and Ukraine can do this, and we can all help them to get there.
Let me use this opportunity to react to several things that have been said here. It's absolutely right, Mr. Cox, that yes, Ukraine could be an appealing example of transformative practices, not only for the whole Eurasia, if we stopped our strategies as business as usual towards Ukraine, or support as usual towards Ukraine, and business as usual towards Russia. And I think that these creative instruments that Mr. Kubilius, for example, was pointing out to, or people who were asking about the European perspective, all of this has to still, all of us have to still keep in mind, we are doing this and we are discussing this on the kind of wall screen of the war that is being fought every single day. And somehow we are right now here discussing, okay, whether Ukraine will disappoint or not disappoint the West, whether Ukraine will succeed or not. Let's see. And the conditionality, the instruments that we are using towards Ukraine, they have shown their effectiveness back in early 2000 to other countries, but they have not been implied at that point when the country, any of those countries, was fighting the war. And that somehow is not present on this agenda in this discussion. So my question is whether the West is actually keeping the test. And I would echo here our former Prime Minister, Mr. Yatsenyuk, that it's not about whether Ukraine is being tested for the West. It is about the West taking and passing this exam of civilizational choice for itself. Because as I said, like, what you fight for is what you believe in, and what you believe in is what you really are. So what does Europe fight for? What does Europe believe in today? What does Europe is really today as such? You know, Putin wants to draw a line, and he wants that line to include Ukraine on that side. So the question is, does the West, does Europe, and does the US, and it doesn't matter right now, finger pointing, who is responsible, you know? US is pointing out, okay, Ukraine is Europe's neighborhood, Ukraine, and therefore the EU is responsible for what's going on in Ukraine. And legitimately asked question, why the Budapest Memorandum is not working and has not been working, and why the Budapest Memorandum did not bring any tangible result and tangible solution at the very beginning. But that's not the question right now. We are 2.5 years since the start, along the way, since the start of the aggression. And we are still deciding whether we can keep the unity or we cannot keep the unity. We are still actually putting on the same level and starting to mix the discussions of reforms in Ukraine with continuation of sanctions towards Russian Federation. And these are just two separate topics. And the test for the West is whether the West is ready to pay, in the Western leaders are ready to pay with their percentage of their popularity because they are standing tall for Ukraine. Whether they are ready to be exposed every single day to Russian propaganda and still fight for Ukraine. And whether they are ready to actually continue something, so those values that they've actually came to power with, that the whole European Union was built on. And something that I want to mention, Jose Manuel Barroso, at some point he said, he has come up with such a formula that solidarity, he said solidarity and stability are always going together. So I really think right now here, for the stability of Ukraine, there needs to be solidarity in the West. And for the stability in the West, there should be solidarity with Ukraine. And they do not go without each other. They do not go, and the choice, if you are trying to put the choice between solidarity and support and solidarity and stability, this is a false choice.
Mr. President, your remarks are absolutely legitimate. We want to make Ukraine a success story. But let's go back 2.5 years. Name any country in Europe who came through these kind of challenges like Ukraine and Ukrainians did. Zero. No one. Having Russian aggression, the country that was on the brink of financial collapse, okay? Dysfunctional government, Russian spies infiltrated in all national security agencies, okay? And very high aspirations of Ukrainian people, because people deserve to have the better life. And every single day, they ask the government, show us this bright future. And instead of this, for example, my government had to pass 4 austerity packages, increase taxes, frozen wages and salaries, impose taxes on pensions, to make Ukrainian fiscal and budgetary system more robust, to undertake extremely unpopular, but once again, the only possible steps. And, you know, the majority of Ukrainian people, they say, look, what the hell is going on? So that's the Europe we were dreaming about? And we have a bunch of lunatics sitting in the house and in politics saying that, look, they are wrong. They did this and that. They can't fix the country because they want to grab the power. They are fighting for the power, and we are fighting for the country. So in these current circumstances, what needs to be done, Mr. President? We do understand that the IMF program is the way how to stabilize Ukrainian macroeconomic performance. But we need growth. People ask for jobs. People ask for salaries and wages. People ask for better healthcare. People ask for better education. And for this, what we need resources. Look, let's compare a support package or an aid package of Greece and Ukraine. Eh? As far as I remember, thanks God, there is no Russian tanks in Greece. We do have. We spend more than 5% of our GDP as military expenditures. We protect Europe. We are the only army in Europe that deterred Russian army and Russian troops. So my appeal to my European friends, we need investment. We need leverage how to make Ukrainian economy robust, how to increase growth. We are not allowed to lose hearts and minds of Ukrainian people. We are on the brink of this. Let me be very blunt and frank. So, people have to believe that these folks, they know what to do, they know how to make it, they have the support of the free world, and we will make it together. And that's my appeal to you. We are from the same family. Our success is your success.
Well, pardon me? Well, there's lots of people who still want to ask questions. I will do something uncharacteristic, though. I will follow directions. And I've been told that we've got to wrap it up because we've got dinner and we've got a special guest and all these things. So I apologize to the several people who have their hands up we haven't been able to get to. Again, I want to thank the 4 individuals up here for being so direct and for ending the day as strong as we began the day. So again, I think what you're all meant to do is go from here to dinner. And again, let's thank the panel for their words.